Warm morning light crept over the rolling hills, revealing neat rows of grapevines glistening with dew. The two vineyards stood side by side on adjacent slopes, their buildings perched near the winding dirt road that snaked through the valley. The region was known for its premium vintages, and the area's greatest pride was an annual competition that crowned one vintner as the best in the valley. Over the years, many talented men and women had fought for the coveted award, yet this year promised a contest more intense and intimate than any before. At the center of it all were two estates that had quietly bristled with rivalry from the moment they were founded decades ago. These rival vineyards, Morningside and Silverleaf, brought forth wines that dazzled connoisseurs, each with a devoted fan base convinced of its absolute superiority. The owners of these vineyards were as dissimilar as the wines they produced. Celeste Moore of Morningside carried on her late father's legacy, and Noah Sterling of Silverleaf had taken over from an aging uncle who had retired to the coast. Neither had originally aspired to take over their family's businesses. Life had nudged them both here, against the backdrop of dusty cellars and sprawling vines. Though they inhabited the same land, their paths had rarely crossed, as each inherited a certain wariness of the other estate. Now, with the all-important competition drawing near, an unspoken tension hovered in the air. Workers bustled in the vineyards, discussing soil conditions and grape readiness, but the families and staff all understood that this year's showdown could elevate one of these two upstarts to a legendary status in the valley. Celeste had grown up fed by stories of wine's enchanting power to bring people together. Her father was a man of strong convictions, an artist with a palate so refined he could detect even the subtlest notes of blackcurrant in a glass of Cabernet. As a child, she loved racing through the fields and trailing after him as he inspected ripening grapes. When he passed away unexpectedly, Celeste took up the mantle. The vineyard at Morningside was all that was left of his dreams. She dedicated herself to continuing his work, believing that in carefully balanced oak barrels and well-tended vines, she could honor his memory. Each day, she awakened early to check each row, tasting grapes for sweetness, measuring sugar levels, and examining how the mosquitoes and bees were affecting the buds. She knew that for the upcoming competition, every delicate nuance could make or break a bottle's destiny. Noah, on the other hand, had a different relationship with the craft. He had studied business in college and planned a future in finance, but when his uncle's health declined, Noah was called to Silverleaf, the last patch of farmland his family owned after losing much of their assets in economic downturns. Running a vineyard wasn't part of his grand plan. Yet from his first few days among the vines, he discovered a sense of fulfillment that no sweet and tie existence had ever granted him. He took joy in the simple routines, adjusting drip irrigation systems, tasting the fresh acidity in the grapes, and meticulously planning harvest schedules. He was nowhere near as experienced as his neighbors, but he had business savvy and a willingness to learn. While Noah respected tradition, he yearned to add a contemporary flair, testing new yeast strains and carrying out small batch experiments in the storeroom. He suspected these innovations might be his secret weapon in the competition. But so far, his attempts at modernizing had also brought him scorn from older vintners who prided themselves on doing things the proper old-fashioned way. From the moment Celeste had taken charge of Morningside, she felt her father's friends urge her to keep an eye on Silverleaf. There was always talk of how the Sterlings cut corners, or how they dared to use technology instead of relying on the century-old methods of cultivation and fermenting. Despite the gossip, Celeste knew very little about Noah personally. On the rare occasions they had crossed paths, polite nods were exchanged, and that was that. She sometimes spied him on the adjoining slope, shading his eyes with a hand to watch new workers or check the progress of vines that climbed trellises. She could see he was tall, with a face that alternated between intense focus and a curious, gentle gaze. Yet any fascination she might have felt was quelled by the reminder that he belonged to a competing estate. Meanwhile, Noah had heard about Morningside's rightful claim to centuries-old winemaking knowledge. He admired how skillfully each cluster of grapes was cared for. Equally, he was slightly intimidated. Celeste's name surfaced in hushed conversations among older farmers, who praised her devotion to the craft as though she too could talk to the vines and coax life into them. In quiet moments, he wondered what it might feel like to talk with her about fermentation times or to swap ideas. But this daydream ended the second he remembered. In just a few months, they would each present their choicest bottles to a panel of judges who would name the region's champion. They were rivals. He could not forget that simple, unwavering fact. The day the official announcement arrived declaring the date of the wine competition, both Morningside and Silverleaf kicked operations into high gear. Celeste met with her vineyard manager and cellar master to plan an intricate schedule. They had to pick the grapes at precisely the right hour on exactly the right day. After the picking, the grapes would be sorted and pressed with care, the temperature monitored with excruciating attention, and the fermentation process carefully adjusted as trends in sugar content and acidity revealed themselves. Across the slope, Noah had his own flurry of meetings, discussing new approaches to cultivating tannins in his reds and achieving more sophisticated floral notes in his whites. Though neither estate truly knew the other's strategy, they both felt a mounting tension in the air, as though a battle for the soul of the valley were about to unfold. One afternoon, Celeste was walking along the boundary between Morningside and Silverleaf. She wanted to check how the vines nearest to their shared fence were faring, because sometimes the neighbors' irrigation practices, too much or too little, could indirectly affect her grapes as well. She paused beneath a large oak tree, marveling at the swirl of color in the late day sky. Just as she leaned down to inspect a dusty cluster, she heard footsteps. She looked up to find Noah watching her from the other side of the fence, his face etched with both curiosity and a mild sense of apology for intruding on her moment. He raised a hand in greeting. She returned the gesture, conscious of the awkwardness, yet something in his eyes suggested a peacefulness that contradicted all the tales of cunning competition she had about him. "Beautiful view today," he said quietly, bridging the still space between them. She nodded, unsure whether to just turn and walk away. Yet they lingered. It was the first time they had truly talked, unforced by social niceties at a public event. The hush of the vineyard enveloped them, vines stretched out in row after row, waiting for the harvest. Finally, Celeste mustered the courage to speak. "I suppose you'll be busy soon." Noah nodded. "Likewise," he said. "We're in the final sprint. It feels like a million things need to go right." The conversation might have ended there, if not for the subtle spark each felt, a gentle curiosity about the other's life. They exchanged a few more sentences about the changing weather patterns, the dryness of the soil, tips for preventing rot. In that moment, they were less enemies than two dedicated stewards of the land, momentarily united in their awe of nature. But with the harvest looming, there was little time to dwell on chance conversations. Celeste threw herself into dawn to dusk labor in the fields, testing the grapes and deciding, often at the last moment, when to pick. Every day she prayed for crisp mornings and mild rains. She corked a small test bottle each day, tasting the developing profiles to gauge how quickly the sugars were converting into alcohol. Over at Silverleaf, Noah did likewise, though he also set up experiments with small oak barrels of different compositions, believing that well-timed barrel changes could introduce an extraordinary complexity to his wines. Workers hustled from row to row, crates piled high with fruit, while farm trucks rattled through the dusty roads. Both estates buzzed with the adrenaline of creation. In a near panic, Celeste discovered an unexpected outbreak of powdery mildew on some of her prized vines. She responded swiftly, spraying and pruning away diseased leaves, but the episode left her anxious. What if the fungus spread? That night, she stayed in the cellar until well after midnight, drawing up new contingency plans. She dreaded losing even a fraction of her best grapes. Meanwhile, Noah faced a challenge of his own. A miscalculation in one fermentation tank had led to an unpleasant, sour smell. He had to act fast to salvage it or risk losing an entire batch. He read everything he could, tested pH levels, and consulted a friend from college chemistry classes, trying every trick to rectify the wine's direction. The stress was immense, but he tried to see it as an opportunity to prove his capacity to innovate. Though their plates were full, Celeste and Noah found themselves strangely thinking of that quiet meeting beneath the oak tree. After days of strenuous labor, each discovered a budding curiosity and respect for the other. One late afternoon, as Celeste inspected the boundary again, she spotted Noah adjusting wires on his side. She hesitated, but eventually hopped over a gap in the fence. Bridging the space between them, he straightened, a gentle look on his face. She asked how the sour batch was coming along, surprising him with her knowledge. He was grateful someone seemed to care. Carefully, he explained that after some creative solutions, he believed it could revert to a more pleasant profile. Hesitantly, he also asked how she was handling her own troubles. Powdery mildew can be vicious, he said. I'm sorry. Are things under control now? She nodded and promised she'd quarantine the infected sections. With that shared empathy, their bond grew. Over the ensuing weeks, they began exchanging small pieces of advice. Nothing that would sabotage their individual chances, but enough to acknowledge mutual respect. Celeste found that, despite the rivalry, helping each other in small ways didn't threaten her quest for excellence. If anything, the conversation sparked new ideas. Sometimes, conflict is transformed not by grand gestures, but by the small, consistent kindnesses that build a bridge of trust. Noah discovered that speaking openly with Celeste about the complexities of soil composition and the timing of punching down fermenting grapes was stimulating. She was thoughtful, detail-oriented, and fiercely protective of Morningside's legacy. He admired that. For her part, Celeste caught glimpses of his innovative spirit. He loved to experiment and never shied away from potential failure. She found that inspiring. Harvest concluded, and soon the critical period of winemaking took hold. One crisp morning, Celeste spoke to her staff about plans for the competition's final selection. She needed to determine which barrels were showing the best potential. Inside Morningside's tasting room, she tested samples from various barrels, swirling each glass to release the aromas. The first sample, too flat. The second, better. A third one, brimming with luscious notes of blackberry, but the tannins still felt rough on the palate. That same day, Noah found himself in Silverleaf's cellar, systematically tasting the results of his small batch experiments. He discovered that one barrel, aged with new French oak, offered an extraordinary aroma, reminiscent of ripe plum and dark chocolate. He felt a surge of thrill, convinced he was onto a winning combination. Alas, complications have a way of circling back. The day after tasting her samples, Celeste discovered that one of the barrels was showing a strange odor, perhaps contaminated by a bung that hadn't been sanitized thoroughly. In a panic, she realized it was the very batch she had pinned her highest hopes on. If it couldn't be saved, her chances of taking home the prize would be drastically reduced. She tried charcoal filtering, adjusting sulfur dioxide levels, anything within reason. Anxious and exhausted, she found herself once again at the fence line one late afternoon, lost in thought. As if on cue, Noah appeared. The weary look in her eyes was enough for him to ask what was wrong. Despite her guarded nature, Celeste gave in to a rare moment of vulnerability and confided the threat to her best barrel. Noah hesitated, aware that every tip he gave her could give her an edge in the competition. Yet, as he looked into her anxious eyes, something deeper stirred within him. He couldn't just walk away when he might have a solution. So he told her about a technique his friend had used in craft brewing, a specialized combination of temperature control and clarifying agents that might remove off aromas. Surprised and initially uneasy, Celeste listened. She recognized that if the contamination was to be stopped, she needed all the help she could get. Eventually, she decided to try it, thanking him with a mix of relief and nerves. When she slipped back home, she couldn't help reflecting on how easily she'd let him in, a competitor no less. But something about Noah was different. He seemed driven not just by winning, but by sincerely wanting to see each vintage shine. In the following days, Celeste's caretaker approach, combined with Noah's suggestions, seemed to stabilize the tainted barrel. The mysterious odor began to fade, replaced by the bright aroma of cherries and earthy undertones. Overcome with gratitude, she ventured to Silverleaf at dusk, timidly knocking on the tasting room door. Noah invited her in and found himself oddly self conscious about hosting his competitor. In the dim light, large oak barrels towered around them, the air weighted with the smell of yeast and fruit. Celeste offered him a taste of her recovering wine. He swirled the sample carefully, inhaling its bouquet. His eyes lit up as he recognized that it had indeed been rescued from the brink of disaster. Quiet pride and relief registered on her face. Their eyes met for a moment that felt suspended in time, the unspoken thought passing between them. This is bigger than rivalry. Before they realized it, they were comparing notes on various blends Noah had been testing. He offered her a sample from his favorite barrel, the French oak experiment that smelled of sweet plum and cocoa. He praised its depth, suggesting small improvements to the acidity that might highlight its floral side. He eyed her, impressed by her immediate, precise feedback. They lost track of time amid the swirl of tastes, analyzing mouthfeel, aroma layers, color intensity. It was as if they'd found their own shared language in the silent walls of the cellar. By the time they realized the hour, the moon had risen high, bathing the vines outside in silver light. Neither had planned it, but that evening became a pivotal bond, an acknowledgement that beyond competition, they found joy in each other's passion. News of their cordial meeting spread around the valley. While neither Celeste nor Noah had explicitly advertised their strange new kinship, rumors circulate quickly in close-knit wine country. Older vintners wagged their heads, muttering about misplaced affection. Some staff members from both estates grew uneasy, worried that secrets might be spilled. But as harvest turned to the final stage of bottling, the pair continued their respectful, if somewhat clandestine exchanges of advice, from ideal oak aging to strategies for smoothing tannins. Slowly, they developed an unspoken pact. Winning or losing, they wanted to see the other thrive. At last, the culminating day of the competition arrived. The gracious old chateau that hosted the event every year was polished to perfection, balconies draped with rustic vines and potted flowers. The judges, a mix of enologists, chefs, and a famous critic from a major city, sat behind a long table set with rows of polished wine glasses. Each competitor brought forth their signature bottle, hoping it would enthrall the panel's discerning palates. Celeste gazed around the grand hall, where a hush of anticipation settled. Noah stood a short distance away, wearing a crisp outfit. He caught her eye and offered a small, encouraging smile. She nodded, heart pounding in her chest. One by one, the vintners poured samples for the judges, explaining their choices of grape, terroir, and aging. The judges swirled and sniffed, sipped and scribbled notes. Morningside was called next. With unwavering composure, she revealed her barrel story, using confident words that belied the heartbreak and trial that had nearly ruined it weeks ago. The judges sampled, faces betraying subtle flickers of approval as they detected the wine's complexity, dark cherries swirling with subtle hints of vanilla and oak. Tension in Celeste's chest unclenched, just a bit. Across the way, Noah gleaned from their expressions that she'd likely made a strong impression. Then Silverleaf's turn arrived. Noah stood, carefully pouring each glass. He spoke of his unusual approach, combining tradition with cutting-edge techniques, explaining how the special oak barrels had shaped the wine's aroma. The judges sipped, their expressions deepening, hinting at curiosity and delight. The panel asked him a flurry of questions. He answered calmly, and Celeste watched him with a mixture of anticipation and pride. The hush returned as the last competitor finished. All that remained was for the panel to deliberate. After an agonizing break of nearly an hour, during which the vintners waited anxiously, the judges returned with their verdict. Third place went to an older vineyard from the northern side of the valley. Then came second place. The moment the announcer said, "Silverleaf," spontaneous applause broke out. Noah felt a wave of both elation and disappointment. He'd come so close. He caught Celeste's eyes, gave her a bittersweet smile. Then the announcer declared, "And first place honors go to Morningside." Cheers filled the hall while Celeste stood stunned, tears pricking her eyes. She barely registered the hush that fell as she stepped forward to accept her trophy and certificate. Her father's dream had been realized. The judges praised the wine's well-rounded flavors, describing it as a testament to true passion. When the ceremony ended, the crowd dispersed to mingle and taste more wines in a celebratory mood. Celeste eased her way to Noah, the heavy gold trophy in her hands. She looked at him, unsure of what to say. She saw a swirl of emotions in his features, but the main one was warmth. "Congratulations," he said quietly. "You deserve it, Celeste." She offered a trembling grin and reached out to gently touch his arm. "I couldn't have done this without your help," she whispered. He shook his head. "You had it in you all along. I just nudged a barrel or two." They laughed softly, a blend of relief, pride, and a bond that was blossoming. The sun was setting behind the hills then, casting a golden glow through the chateau's tall windows. Neither deeply cared in that moment about second or first place. Instead, they recognized the shared joy of having created something beautiful. Later that evening, both vineyards hosted their own celebrations, but Celeste slipped away from Morningside's rowdy festivities, carrying 2 glasses and a bottle of her award-winning vintage wrapped in cloth. She ventured down the road to the oak tree marking the boundary. There she found Noah waiting, seemingly drawn by the same longing. Under the enchanting canopy, they clinked glasses and sipped in silence. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves. Their eyes met once more, and each realized just how extraordinary a journey they had traveled, separate paths that had become entwined. They set aside the glasses and embraced, as naturally as vines wrap themselves around a trellis. In the coming days, news of Morningside's triumph spread across the wine world. Orders poured in. Reporters sought interviews, and Celeste found herself busier than ever. Yet in quiet moments, she would glance at her phone or gaze over at Silverleaf's slope and smile at the knowledge that success no longer felt lonely. Noah's second place showing also garnered him respect. The doubters who had previously dismissed his innovative ideas became intrigued. He found that, despite losing the top spot, the experience had invigorated him. The fleeting disappointment was erased by the knowledge that he stood on the threshold of a bright future, and that he had found a companion who truly understood him. The busy season soon tapered off, and the vines began their slow retreat into winter dormancy. One late afternoon brought yet another visitor to Celeste's boundary fence. She looked up from pruning to find Noah, an invitation in his outstretched hand. "Join me for a new blend tasting," he said. "I'd love your input." The subtle blush on his cheeks revealed his excitement. She accepted readily. The next day, she ventured to Silverleaf, where he revealed a carefully balanced red made from a combination of grapes that tested the marriage of old tradition and new technique. Celeste swirled, sipped, and nodded her approval. Their conversation drifted past wine and into shared dreams, traveling together to other wine regions, exploring new methods, maybe even launching a collaborative label one day. Each idea fueled the sense that their synergy was bigger than competition. And so, as the first frost glazed the valley and bare vines stood like sentinels across the rugged hills, 2 neighboring estates found themselves more connected than ever. A contest had driven them to excel. Shared passion had drawn them to each other. In time, rumors of their growing partnership circulated among local merchants, and some folks teased half jokingly about a wedding uniting the families. Neither Celeste nor Noah dismissed those suggestions outright, something that only stirred further speculation. For them, the real beauty lay in the promise that they were no longer alone in their quest for perfection. They realized that sometimes, when two separate souls pour their hearts into something they love, they can blend together in perfect harmony, creating a vintage far more priceless than could ever be bottled. And in a place defined by grapes and vines, it seemed perfectly fitting that the path to their shared future began in this fertile soil where rivalry could turn to respect and respect could blossom into love.